the Mortality Mindset Podcast with Patrick Mathieu, designed to help you live a life of radical resilience at home, at work, everywhere.
This episode of the Mortality Mindset Podcast is brought to you by me. If you're not already a subscriber to my free weekly email, what is wrong with you? Now seriously, go sign up for the Mortal Living newsletter at mortalliving.substack.com or at the bottom of the moralitymindset.com, and I'll also put a link in the show notes. All right, so I want to start with the two big questions that all of us need to answer in our lives. Who am I, and why am I here? I know these are massive questions, like profound existential questions. And unfortunately, they're questions that most people end up asking themselves over and over again. I know this because I've been a coach since 2008 and a speaker since 2003, so I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. And people of all ages and stages have said to me, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I mean, I've had like 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds telling me, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So this is a common thing, and it keeps resurfacing for people because we don't take the time to properly answer the fundamental questions of who am I and why am I here? I don't think it's our fault. It's just how society operates. And I'll talk more about why that is and what we can do about it in a future episode. But for now, I really want to spend time just looking at these questions themselves. So the first question, who am I? Well, there's many ways to answer that. You know, the easiest way to answer is your name. Who am I? I'm Patrick Mathieu. That's who. But if we want to go deeper, it's a really tough question to answer because we're all very complex people. Most times, people simply default to a situational answer. And years ago, I was at a conference and I saw someone do this exercise that highlighted this point beautifully. So let me explain the exercise and I'll use myself as an example. So who are you? I'm Patrick Mathieu. And then the person running the exercise says, see that door over there? Well, there's someone on the other side of that door. And when they come through the door, who do they see when they look at you? So for me, if, let's just say my father comes through the door or my mother. Now, they're both deceased, but for the purpose of our example here, one or both of them come through the door. Well, obviously the answer is, well, they see their son. So now if somebody says, who are you? Well, I'm their son. And being their son, that carries a lot. That carries like a long history of beliefs and actions and assumptions. And if my parents were to walk through that door, I would take on those beliefs and actions and assumptions. Now, obviously, some of those have been changed over the years, but some of them are really deeply ingrained. As anybody who has parents knows, some of these things can carry on for a long time. And I would take on the role of being their son. Now, let's say that the person that walks through the door is one of my kids. I have a boy and a girl. And so if one of them were to come through the door, or both of them, they're going to see their father. And so then if somebody says, who are you? I say, I'm their father. And I take on the mannerisms and the beliefs and the actions and the assumptions that I carry as the father of these two great children or young adults, and dad jokes. Oh shit. Dad jokes are just going all over the place because that's just part of the package. Sorry, kids. That can't be helped. So now I'm still the son of my parents, but if they're not in the room, I won't be thinking of myself in that light. I'll be thinking of myself primarily as the father to my kids. So you're getting a sense for how this exercise works? And, the reality is that a lot of people shift their personalities and maybe even their sense of identity based on the role that they're currently filling. So when I fill the role of father, I think of myself in a certain way. When I fill the role of son, I think of myself in a different way. And the differences may be slight, or they might be pretty profound. And this is absolutely normal human behavior. You know, who you are with your best friend, think about it for a second. Who you are with your best friend is most likely entirely different than who you are with your boss, or let's say your boss's boss even. You know, you'll probably behave differently. You might speak differently. It's just a different vibe hanging out with your best friend versus sitting in a meeting with your boss's boss. So we're constantly mixing and matching pieces of our personality and our identity and reflecting those to others in order to fit a certain role. So, you know, let me keep going with myself here as the example. So over the years, who have I been? I've been a student. I've been a university student. Then I spent a decade in sales. So I was a sales rep. I was an account manager. I was a sales manager. I was a country manager. I managed the Canadian territory. I had credentials that added letters to the end of my name in the area of information security. I had a whole career where the question, who are you, centered around information security sales. Like a decade-long career where that was a big chunk of my identity in that situation, right? So if my boss walked through the door, or one of my clients, or a prospect, or one of the partners that I had in the manufacturing world or in the vending world, like one of my vendors walked through, or, you know, there were a whole lot of people who, if they walked through that door, the who are you would be tied to sales. And then that shifted for me and changed when I started to do my work in the field of personal development. And I started that by speaking to other people and helping them, you know, really make the most of their lives. So the more I started to do that, the more the question of who are you became focused around that work. So who are you? I'm a speaker. You know, I started speaking in 2003 and talking about my story and helping people with that. And then I started doing workshops. So I'm a workshop leader. I'm a speaker and a workshop leader. That's who I am. And then I wrote a book. So now I'm a speaker and a workshop leader and an author. And then I started coaching people. And then I became a certified life coach, and then a certified master coach. And then I wanted to train people as coaches. So the answer to the question, who are you, really got more and more complex and involved and evolved as time went on. But underneath it all, you know, how I would answer that question really depended on who was asking it. And that really was the point of the exercise that I saw at that conference years ago. You know, they asked the person who volunteered to play along, and I'll ask you to kind of play along with me now. So think about yourself sitting there and there's a doorway, and who are you if your boss comes through the door? Who are you if your kids come through the door? Who are you if your spouse comes through the door? If you have one. And the big question, and this is what they did in the workshop, the big question that they asked is, who are you if no one comes through the door? Who are you if you're alone in the room by yourself? Think about that for a second. Who are you when you're all by yourself? There's no role to play, and there are no external expectations to be met. That is a very, very difficult question for a lot of people. And it can be downright scary for some. As a coach, I've worked with a lot of people who spend a lot of time running from that question. And it's probably because a blank slate can be paralyzing for some people. If you've ever tried writing or being creative, just the blank canvas can paralyze you. Or, a blank document, a fresh document with just a blinking cursor. Oh my God, that can cause problems. I mean, it's an endless amount of possibilities. And where do you start with that? So the easy way out, when you're faced with that question of who are you when there's nobody else in the room, the easy way out is to be something else and to do it for someone else. It's a nice kind of ready-made shortcut. You just take on a role and you play it. So you play the role of son, because that's who you are when you're young, right? You're somebody's son or daughter. And so it's a very easy role to take on because you're already doing it. Or you play the role of parent, the father or the mother role. Or you play the role of spouse, or the role of employee, or customer, or boss, and so on and so on. And all you have to do when you're playing those roles is, fit the expectations that go along with it. It's really difficult to answer the question, who are you, if nobody else is in the room, because most of us are never given an opportunity to think deeply and meaningfully about it. From our earliest days, we're busy fitting in. When we're first born, we think we're the center of the world, right? And you are. When you're an infant, all you got to do is cry and you get what you need. It's great. And then at some point, you grow up a little bit more and you start interacting with other people and you realize that there's a world outside of you. And then at some point, you end up going off to school or daycare or some other place where you've got to figure out how to get along with other people. And you have to figure out how to share, and you have to figure out how to cooperate. And we start developing our first friendships and becoming, little socialized beings. And all along the way, we're still figuring ourselves out. And for the most part, we're doing that based on the reactions of other people. Right? I'm going to say that again. For the most part, figuring ourselves out comes from the reactions of other people. Because as a very young child, we don't, I don't know if we're capable of, being a totally self-actualized little person and saying, this is who I am. So I'm not a child psychologist. I can't tell you the ages and stages of when that kind of thinking is possible. But I think for most people, it's just, if the world is giving me positive feedback, I'm going to keep doing that thing. If the world is giving me negative feedback, I'm not going to do that thing. And that's kind of how we figure ourselves out. So we learn to negotiate the interplay between, what I want or what makes me feel good and what other people expect of me. And we're never really given that blank sheet of paper where we can figure out who we are and what we want to do while we're here. And, that brings me to the second question of why am I here? So once again, for a lot of people, the enormity of that second question just pushes us into a default mode. It's so much easier to make it about your role. Why am I here? Oh, because I'm the father of these two wonderful kids and they are my world. Or you end up answering with your job title. Why am I here? Because I'm the regional manager in charge of whatever. Or I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a biologist. Now, that might be what you do, but that's not necessarily why you're here. Of course, the existential question of who am I and why am I here, it's foundational to our lives. But on a more pragmatic level, there's another reason why they're so important and why they keep popping up over and over again in our lives. From time to time, there'll be giant shifts and changes in our lives. And when those things happen, our identity can get completely rocked. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're a journalist. On a normal day, you know exactly what you need to do when you wake up. You have a routine. You get to work, you have colleagues, you maybe have an editor to meet with, you have stories to work on, sources to follow up with, research to do, deadlines to meet, and so on. You know who you are and you know why you're here. And that's tied to your job as a journalist. But now I want you to imagine that in yesterday's team meeting, they announced that the company you work for is getting bought out. And no one knows what that's going to mean for the future. So today when you wake up, you're not sure who you are or why you're here, because you're not sure if you'll continue being who you've been and doing what you've done. This can easily lead to a full-blown identity crisis. And as a coach, I've seen this numerous times. People have their identity wrapped up in their job or even their job title. They get accustomed to the lifestyle and the perks that come along with the job. And if that gets taken away from them for whatever reason, suddenly they wake up and they can't answer the question, who am I? Because they're stuck on who they used to be. And it doesn't even need to be something drastic like sudden job loss. It can be something much more, organic and natural. I'll give you two examples and you tell me if they sound at all familiar. Maybe they're directly familiar to you because you've gone through it, or maybe it's familiar because you know someone who's gone through it. So the first example involves people whose foundational identity is, I'm a parent. I'm the father of these kids, or I'm the mother of these kids. What happens to your identity when those kids move out of the house? It's the classic empty nest syndrome. We spend 18, 20, whatever it ends up being, years caring for these kids and focusing on them and doing everything we can for them, making sure that they have the love and the support that they need to have a great life. And then they have the nerve to go off and live the great life without us, right? On the one hand, we're very proud and we're very happy for them. But when they go, it's the reverse of the scenario I spoke about earlier, where I asked you, when someone comes into the room, who are you? Now the question is, if the kids leave the room, who are you? A lot of parents whose identity is wrapped up in being a parent don't know how to answer that question and might face an identity crisis of sorts when the nest is finally empty. And the second example I want to give you goes back to the idea that people can get overly identified with their job and its status. But this time I want you to imagine that it's not a traumatic event where you lose your job. It's simply just time to retire. You've done the work, you've contributed, you've had a wonderful time, and now it's time for you to retire. Part of you is really looking forward to this. You can't wait to retire and have all this newfound time available to do all the things you haven't been able to do. But the time comes and you're lost. You don't know who you are anymore. Now if somebody says, who are you? The only answer that comes to mind is, well, I used to be whatever, or I'm a retired whatever. I've seen a lot of people struggle with this as well, and this can have some very serious consequences. I won't go into all the statistics, but there are some statistics out there about the decline that people can experience if they're not mentally and emotionally prepared for retirement, or any of those big shifts and pivots that happen in life. And they find they're not able to shift and pivot because their sense of identity was lost. We need to think more about who we are and why we're here. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk more about why we don't spend enough time looking at these big questions. And, of course, I'm going to give you some suggestions and some solutions on how we can more effectively tackle these questions. But for now, I want to encourage you to really set aside some time to think about those big questions. Who are you? And importantly, who are you when no one else is in the room? You might want to make some notes. I encourage you to look at it from a number of different angles and take it seriously, because this is what life is all about. Deciding who we are and deciding why we're here.